Let's go ahead and take a look at this example. We want to go ahead and plot the point P, and we're given some polar coordinates of 3 pi over 6. So keep in mind, this is the same thing as our radii value and an angle measure. And if you want to go ahead and work in degrees, this is the same thing as the point 3 and 30 degrees for our angle measure. So let's go ahead to our polar grid and we'll plot our point. We'll let one circle equal 1 radii length. So we're going to be coming out along our 30 degree piece, and we're going to count out a total of 3 radii lengths. And let's go ahead and plot point P. Now if we take a look at our question, each of these pieces, part A, B, and C, is going to give us some additional criteria so that we find some other coordinates to represent this exact same point. So let's go ahead and look at part A. We want a radii value greater than 0, and our angle measure here, we want it to be between 2 pi and 4 pi. So keep in mind, this is telling us that our angle measure should be between 360 degrees and 720 degrees. So if our radii value has to be something greater than 0, then we can go ahead and still use that same R value of 3. Okay? And for our angle measure, if we want it to be between 360 and 720 degrees, obviously we could do a full rotation to get that 360 degrees. And then we have to go another 30 degrees so that we end up in that same location as point P. So this will be 360 plus that 30 degrees. So our new point here is going to be 3, and angle measure wise we'll have 390 degrees. If you want to list this in radians, this is the same thing as the point 3, 13 pi over 6. So let's go ahead and take a look at our next one. Let's go ahead and do part C next, since this one still has a radii value that's something greater than 0. So we can actually use the same radius of 3 in this example. And this time we want our angle measure to be something between negative 360 degrees and 0. So if you take a look at our point P that we had plotted, this time if we were coming downward first, we would have to go a total of negative 330 degrees so that we end up on this same radial line. So our point here is going to be 3 negative 330 degrees. And if you want to go ahead and write that angle measure in radians, this is the same thing as 3 11 pi over 6. And now let's go ahead and take a look at part B. This time we want an angle measure between 0 and 360 degrees. And in this case we want a radii value that's less than 0. So keep in mind, if we want a value less than 0, our R in this case is going to have to be a negative 3. Right? Because we still need to end up in the same location as point P. Now keep in mind, since that radii value is negative, that means we need to end up along this radial line, but we're going to be counting in the opposite direction so that we can end up in quadrant 1 with regard to our point. So if you take a look at this angle measure here, this is the radial line that represents 210 degrees. So our angle measure is going to need to be a positive 210 degrees. That would actually put us out here in quadrant 3, But because that radii value is negative, we would actually be counting 3 units in the opposite direction along that radial line so that we end up in the same spot as point B. So our answer here is going to be -3, 210 degrees. Or if you want to write that in radians, this will be the same thing as -3 and 7 pi over 6.